Hello and welcome to Interop Digital. My name is Lenny Heyman. I'm the Content Director for Interop, and I'm really pleased you've joined us here today. We have a great program in store for you that focuses on some of the key technologies for you and your IT organization, including networking, cloud computing, and security. Of course, today all those three work together. All three are inseparable. And so I'm excited about the program we brought together for you and experts we've got to help you navigate each of those three areas and learn to bring them together. I'm particularly excited about our opening keynote, and here to moderate and to host that talk is Executive Editor of Dark Reading, Kelly Jackson Higgins. Kelly, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lenny. Hello and welcome to Interop Digital Fireside Chat. I'm Kelly Jackson Higgins, the Executive Editor of Dark Reading. And with me today is our keynote speaker, Gunter Ollmann, who's the Chief Security Officer with Microsoft's Cloud and AI Security Division. I've had the honor to know Gunter since his IBM days and back when he was chasing botnets for Damballa. Welcome, Gunter.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's great to be able to sit down with you again, even remotely like this. So we're going to be talking a little bit about cloud computing and security. And I thought maybe we'd start first with sort of the elephant in the room. Most organizations had to sort of accelerate any planned gradual cloud rollouts they had when the pandemic hit, sending their employees home to work in home offices. What do you see as sort of the potential consequences here security-wise long-term, given that many are just going to stay working from home, a lot of offices are closing? And then kind of how has that fast-tracked some cloud-type technologies, both on the security and networking space?
Sure. Well, I think Satya Nadella said it quite well earlier in this year that we saw 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, right? And that's had a huge impact on the way that organizations, large enterprises have modified their working from home policies and changed things. I think some of the key things that I've sort of really seen have been obviously the growth of remote working and the real acceleration of if you like the zero trust type networking, the SASE type environments, but effectively this redesign of access to corporate assets and the cloudification of the on-premises type assets as well. So that sort of mix is going on there. From a security perspective, what I'm hearing from customers and other CISOs has been that security actually for the end user and the end customer has improved through the acceleration. There are still gaps though. I think some of the most difficult parts that are still trying to get our hands around, at large enterprises, seems to be lie in the realm of patch management of unmanaged devices or unowned devices, right? And so that's sort of changing, but I think that's sort of balanced with the push on zero trust.
You just touched on the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and that was this whole concept of visibility and being able to see those blind spots in the network. We saw early on before the pandemic, a lot of misconfigured, cloud configurations, in the AWS buckets. And we've seen, a lot of companies, even before the cloud cloud explosion here, we saw them having trouble with their physical IT infrastructures, knowing what's out there because of mobile devices and IoT devices. But when you have cloud in there as well, it seems like there's more room for blind spots and misconfigurations. What are some of the roles here that say the cloud providers can do to help enterprises kind of get on top of that?
Well, it's odd when I sort of look at this, and what I see is that I think there's two things that are happening from an enterprise perspective. One is, adding the cloud or the digital transformation has added another level or another whole environment that needs to be managed and secured. And that adds a lot of new stress, a lot of new skills, and there's a skill gap that still needs to be closed in managing that. And that also translates to resources. But on the other side, what we're sort of seeing is that you pointed out these misconfigurations and these security issues of the cloud. A lot of it has to do with perhaps that skill set doesn't exist today on the on-premises teams, and this is additional burden they have to work through. From a cloud operator perspective, what we're seeing is that the growth of cloud security posture management or CSPM technologies, and frankly they've been working so well that one of the leading one of the leading asks from customers is, how do I take that CSPM technology, that approach, and bring it back to on-premise, right? What we're seeing with the CS technology is the ability to manage and bring all of those assets, all those resources in one place, manage them through a consistent policy, and to manage that posture in one element, in one view. That seems to be working really, really well.
Talk a little bit more about cloud posture stuff, because that was something I wasn't as familiar with, and I know you and I talked about it. Explain kind of what that is and how that sort of plays into this equation.
Sure. So if you sort of think, we started a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, through vulnerability scanning, vulnerability asset management, right? And we still have that type of tools today, in the community for identifying those assets and providing a level of what patches are on there, what services are available, et cetera, et cetera. As we move into the cloud environment, you've now got the infrastructure as a service, the VMs, you've got the PaaS services, you've got the SaaS services, you've got serverless services, and you're managing through resources and resource managers. And bringing all those things together, being able to understand and manage your infrastructure, not just as a global spanning infrastructure, but also as applications. When you speak to an organization, you'll be speaking to the finance owner, and they'll say, I have the finance application and I have the PO application, and behind that there are lots of different assets and resources. And so security posture management tooling allows you to get that visibility, that control, manage against policies, and I think an interesting aspect of this, some of the feedback we've been getting has been about providing that score, understanding what that risk or what that security value is for an asset, for a resource, but also for my application or my environments, right? And that's actually, it feels like it's been I think the term that many people have been using is gamification, right? And so CSPM has been that sort of vehicle for providing visibility of security risk, vulnerabilities, vulnerability management, and then a little bit of gamification to enable and help customers and organizations improve their security posture as they go along.
How does the gamification thing work? I feel like that's like the key word to everything these days is gamify it. How does that work in this environment?
I think it's a very loose interpretation, honestly, but today, a lot of that sort of gamification or security scoring is, if I have an asset, I understand a little bit about its risk, and so I can assign a sort of base score for this. And then every single vulnerability or every single missing or bad configuration or step away from best practices has a value associated with it. And if I fix that, then I get an improvement in that score, right? And so, security will never be 100%, but hopefully as you develop these sort of things, you keep on improving your score. And what we've sort of seen is that for larger enterprises, they may have multiple applications or multiple environments, and the teams around the world actually compete to get better scores, right? That sort of improves on there. But from my perspective, from a cloud provider, it also really helps improve some fundamental things. So, for example, that scoring is a little bit arbitrary and sort of based on, in this case, Microsoft's security expertise on these values. And so, one example was we looked at multi-factor authentication, right? And we assigned it at a higher score. And what we found was that, on one hand, was that about 80% of compromises, of asset compromises in the cloud is due to people not having multi-factor authentication, right? And as soon as we created the score for multi-factor authentication, and that then would reflect in people's overall security score, we suddenly started to see people turning it on and using it more. So I'm all for gamification if that seems to work.
So one of the big questions I think a lot of organizations are still struggling with is, what is the role of the IT team versus the security team, especially when you're bringing cloud providers in? How do you kind of dole out the responsibilities, and what are you seeing as some of the trends there, and what are some of your recommendations for how organizations can manage all that?
Well, I think it's broadened those teams now, right? So the IT team, the SecOps, the NetOps teams converging together really into one part of the business, and they're becoming much more focused on an area of business as opposed to a speciality, if you like, right? What we're seeing is that security is being absorbed and being owned by the business leaders themselves. And there's, if you like, those security, the security experts, the networking experts are becoming more internal consultants, providing sort of guidance. So in many ways, it was shifted from the mix of being that squeaky wheel, saying we should do this, and here are the reasons why it's good for best practices, through to let me understand your business operation and how you need to do business. And let me work as a peer and a colleague to help you work down this path, right? And I think this, it started from the cloud perspective of a shared responsibility model, as we sort of talked about the infrastructure elements being owned, managed, and secured by the cloud providers, and what that gap was for above that for those companies that were infrastructure that were providing that were using that infrastructure. That has now sort of moved, and I think one of the areas that we talk about more now is the growth of the involvement of the software engineering teams, right? And so this whole sort of mix, especially in the cloud, as organizations make that transition from on-premise to running VMs in the cloud just as a data center, to PaaS services, and then on to full SaaS services and environment and configuration. Everything moves down to an infrastructure as a code perspective, right? And so that responsibility for how do I secure, how do I configure my network, how do I operate my business, now has been delegated, and that responsibility is now shared across those organizations, those teams inside the organization.
Does this kind of help with the resources problem the security teams have? Does it sort of, I think about there's never enough people, right? Everyone talks about that. They have open positions, too much work to do. Does this potentially help with that?
I reserve judgment at the moment. I think we're on a path there, a shared responsibility. I think there's a difference between the responsibility and the knowledge to do some of these parts, right? And so we're still working on that. In fact, as I sort of mentioned, that 2 years digital transformation in 2 months, sort of translates also into things like the growth of, in Microsoft's case, Microsoft Teams, with 115 million users on, per day, and how that translates then also into education and training. It feels way, it's gone from way too long now. The ability to sit in a room, with colleagues and peers, and to learn a new technology. Now it's all going through online, and we're actually seeing that the online training, the tie-in with video conferencing and these things together are accelerating the knowledge transfer, and I think that helps with that responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I know one of the big challenges we see over and over again on the security side. I'm wondering if that kind of, like you said, bleeds over a little bit. So I know one of the things that I was thinking about too was for the networking devices side of things. So when you have more cloud-based edge type services, virtual infrastructure, what are some of the things that security professionals need to know how to work in those environments? Are they going to rely mainly on the networking folks to do the stuff they always did, or do they have to learn more about different ways to look at that environment? How would you sort of explain that?
Well, I mean, I think the transition's been going on for a while now, and that is, you can't be a security professional without being, a very good, if not an expert in networking, right? And today it's also becoming the vice versa, right? Even some of the more specialized networking skills, say on DNS and the root protocols, they are coming together, and so that means from a skill set, from an individual in those operations teams, you have those sort of mixed skills and mixed responsibilities. But also, when you sort of think of the day-to-day operation, especially from a cloud and a cloud-first perspective, it really has become this infrastructure as code and configuration as code, right? And what that means is that those assets, those resources become ephemeral, and there are, you have to change the way that you operate. So for today, when you go to the cloud and you spin up half a dozen virtual machines, and attach your Active Directory and your firewall and all these sorts of elements, they're a resource tree. They're out, they can be managed as code. But even by taking those assets and just grouping them together, you have in decade-old technology and decade-old terms, created a DMZ with a firewall built in that was just created through one click, right? And so that sort of changed, where the networking pieces and the security pieces are part of and built in fundamentally to the way that you actually run and develop your business online.
That seems like that would help that whole asset management, visibility, deployment, configuration side of things, right? Ideally, that's the goal, right? To have it smarter and more automated and more integrated.
That's correct, and part of my responsibility, is to further close that gap, right? I want to get away from these things, and I'm not the only one. I think any CISO or any IT operations person is probably already overwhelmed with all of those events and alerts from security that's been going on, and misconfigurations, through to the missing patches, compliance issues. The number of events, the number of alerts has just become overwhelming. And part of my role and what I'm trying to do is, if I see an alert 5 times a day, for the same type of thing, and it gets fixed this particular way, then why doesn't the tool and technology, solve that for you? I want to sort of, and I think that, everyone sort of wants to sort of boot to this technology where, I see this once, I fixed it this way. You know what? I'm going to trust you and trust the system to, if I see it again, just keep on fixing it, and then just tell me at the end of the day or the end of the month all the things that you automatically did for me on my behalf that were correct, right? And sort of move that. And I think that also then translates into the number, the skill sets of the people that are required there, and that skill shortage can be sort of translated into that automation, and I think that the growth of the injection of artificial intelligence, machine learning into these types of processes.
And that's exactly what I wanted to just ask you about, because I was thinking it's always automation, AI. We hear about that, and so AI has got this sort of misunderstood, view of what it is. There's a lot of hype, but obviously this area very well. So how do you see it working here in terms of securing the enterprise cloud and these hybrid infrastructures? What are the areas where it can really help? And are we just not seeing it in some cases now because it's kind of part of the package and we don't really know because it's just doing its thing?
Well, I think there are a few different lenses. So on the latter comment, modern technologies of anti-spam, anti-phishing, anti-malware are largely and pretty much overtaken now by AI, right? So those 20, 30 years of all those malware samples, phishing samples and the curated data sets and the expertise has been distilled down into new AI systems that create machine learning classifiers that are then deployed, and they're working much, much better, right? They're stopping more and more threats, even though the bad guys are also investing in AI and machine learning to try to bypass these classifiers, bypass these back-end or black box type AI sort of systems, right? And so I think that's, if AI, or in this case machine learning, does its jobs well, then you don't see it, and that's good, right? Another aspect, though, is that AI also coming into the NetOps, security ops space, right? And in particular, getting rid of the drudgery, right? As sort of mentioned, all those alerts, this alert fatigue, which is now translated into posture fatigue of all these events and all these things I should do. Of those hundreds or thousands of events that are sort of popping up, then why not let the AI do the triaging, of these things, reduce these things down? Ultimately, I want to really know what are the 5. If my capacity is to do 6 things today, what are those 6 things? And anything else that's below that should be automated or is not important, or I can't get around to it today. But the third part of this really is that companies themselves developing their own AI and investing, their own expertise developing in machine learning and artificial intelligence into the products that they then produce. That's an interesting part, because that's now becoming a target for the bad guys, right? And ranging from things of poisoning back-end systems and data through to I think we've all seen these pictures of stop signs with little stickers put on there to where the car now thinks that it's a 50-mile-an-hour zone type of things, right? And so there's a lot of work going on this sort of adversarial machine learning space.
So how do you kind of protect against that if you're an organization that's starting to adopt, some of these technologies, and you've got your classifiers set up or whatever, and then suddenly the bad guys are trying to get past them? How do you defend against that?
Well, I think there are three pieces to this. So one is a lot of new research has been going into this space. And so if you're familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework for understanding security, Microsoft and 12 other global enterprise research teams and academic teams have created an adversarial ML threat matrix. It feels and looks very similar to sort of the MITRE ATT&CK sort of framework, but it's based on multiple years of research of actually what the real attacks are, what are the tools and tactics that the bad guys are using, and providing advice on how to secure against those particular types of attacks. So I think there is sort of work going on there. As a cloud provider, as companies are building their models and using a lot of the cloud resources to understand their data and to create the classifiers and train their AIs, and then deploy them. I think this shared responsibility model is also coming to, is embracing that, the machine learning and the AI systems as well. So part of my groups and part of the roles is how do we take those learning, those protections, and actually start building them into those tools that customers and the enterprises are actually using to build on there. But I think the third piece of the puzzle really is the responsible AI process, and this is the devoid of the security and devoid of the much of the mechanics behind there, but making sure that those models are understandable. It can be reversed to understand what's going on in there, so they're no longer sort of black box there. But also, thinking very carefully about and responsibly using, this machine learning and artificial intelligence to solve these problems, and understanding what the limits of these are.
Can you explain a little bit about, I don't know if everyone is familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, that's definitely the security industry knows about it, but how that plays into the threat matrix you're talking about, how that would work like in a real world situation, how you could apply that in your organization?
Sure. So one of the, I guess the MITRE ATT&CK framework is sort of covers the way that the phases of an attack. You'll sometimes hear the term of a kill chain. The way that an adversary may start with passively inventorying your network or your environment, understanding what the layout is before targeting assets, and then escalating permissions, and then staying for a long time and exfiltrating data. So there's distinct sort of phases in there. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework breaks down these phases, looks at all the different tools and tactics that adversaries use, and provides guidance on how to detect and to protect against these. And then, from a threat intelligence perspective, overlay that sort of threat matrix to the way that distinct adversarial groups operate, so that you can label and track them. From a adversarial machine learning threat matrix, same thing, but we're now focusing on the machine learning side and the artificial intelligence, because they have different processes. There's a different relationship between assets and technologies, and the tools and techniques are different. So I give an example of putting stickers on a stop sign. That's not going to be covered by the traditional MITRE type of attack framework, but is the perturbations of attacks are sort of covered in this sort of matrix. So again, I encourage people to have a look at and contribute to the space. It's fast evolving, and as every new technology, when it gets turned over underneath that rock, people are finding new ways of compromising it and using it for malfeasance.
Yeah, and then new threat groups have to join that matrix.
That's great. We expect it to expand. And I think another interesting aspect to this, of both of the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the machine learning threat matrix, is to bring that back home for, for particularly SecOps and SOC operations, and to be able to translate and use that into the new sort of graph-based investigation tools. We've seen a lot of advancement in cloud SIEM technologies, but in particular, the move from query-based languages into graphical interfaces for investigating data, and being able to, a lot of new advancements in, again, pulling in that data and making it much easier to use, both the networking, security, and configuration and governance pieces, but also then translating and overlaying that through those kill chains into the threat matrices, and providing better guidance and visibility onto how to mitigate an attack underway, and also to clean up afterwards and investigate across teams.
Do you have any sort of final advice or even just thoughts about, and we've covered a lot of ground here in terms of this environment, but some advice you give to IT and security teams that are managing all this cloud and on-premise convergence right now, and starting to be concerned about how who's doing what and how to make sure they're on top of everything, and they're getting the most out of this technology that's evolving now in the services. Any kind of advice you would give to them, and what to do next or what they should be doing? There's 4 things you can do. I don't know what would be the best way to approach it, but just to give them some takeaways, I guess.
I think a couple of things. So one is to understand and recognize that identity has become the pivot pane for management, for cloud management, security management, network management, everything. So that identity, those identity management tools, and the way that we secure and use identities is now fundamental to the way that business, that IT operations and cloud operations work. Right? And so that is quite a transformation, right? We've moved from securing assets and understanding those assets and managing assets to now identity. And so getting your head around that aspect. But I think what I sort of mentioned in passing is that 80% of cloud attacks could have been stopped through multi-factor authentication, right? So it's as plain as that. If all your assets and all your systems aren't yet using multi-factor authentication, then turn that on, and we can build from that base.
That's really good advice. You always make me smarter, Gunter. It's really great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. A lot to think about, but you gave some really great insight for attendees. So thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.